Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a fascinating show today. You watch the show all the time, and we love bringing entrepreneurs on the show who are really leaders in their particular space. And it doesn't matter what space they're in, as long as they're making impact, as long as they're doing great things, as long as they are taking a leadership position and they have an idea about what's going to happen in the future. They're almost a zeitgeist in the future in their particular vertical, we call it. And of course, we've been able to book today a very interesting entrepreneur. He's got a very fascinating business. It's one that I'm really interested in. The name of his company is Cherrywood Enterprises, and he is the CEO. His name is Mr. Craig Geisler, and they work with banks. And, I always wonder what happens to the debt at banks where they need to figure out what to do with debt that goes bad. And Craig has become a real top leading expert in this field. He's been in this space for over 9 years. He's actually been buying debt for over 14 years. And he really knows the insides and outs of buying debt from entities that need to move their debt along to the next level. He also has put together an amazing group of attorneys throughout the country that help him in his enterprise. But before we get started, Craig, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet, and then we'll get going.
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. So, and the long and short of it, Cherrywood is a enterprise that works with banks, credit unions, auto lenders, and commercial lenders. We are a purchaser of charged-off debt portfolios. So we buy charged-off credit cards, consumer loans, auto deficiencies, you name it, we buy it. We've been doing this since 2012, and we want to continue for many, many years to come. So thanks for having us this morning.
Yeah, I love it so much. We talk about it all the time. We talk about money. We talk about finances on the show. We talk about startup capital. We talk about the way in which the financial business works, the way in which the business of money works. And one thing very few people think about, because, we're busy in our days as entrepreneurs, Craig, is that banks do get some bad debt along the way, and they turn to people like you or your team at Cherrywood to move it along. But let's talk about, what does that process look like for the banks? What type of debt is it? And then what do you do with it?
All good questions. So our process, it has to be safe. We're working with the banks with the creation of the CFPB. A lot of banks are skittish with their charged-off portfolios, what they do with it. There was a crash back in 2012 of a lot of the banks, the major ones anyway, that sold their debt portfolios, and it was a mess. So they've kind of pulled back doing so, and they want to work with the best of the best out there. And predominantly that was with publicly traded collection agencies. So now what we had to do is we had to kind of go back, take a look at our inner sides, see what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and how we could do it better. So once I became the owner and CEO of Cherrywood Enterprises, I had the experience in the past. I saw what mistakes were made, and I wanted to do it, and I wanted to help the banks. I wanted to help the consumers as well, because it's a give and take on both sides. So a lot of times what the misconception is that the debtors are the bad guys of the whole transaction, and that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of times you can have a debtor who lost a loved one, lost a job, had some real financial issues that came about. It could be a divorce. And they had to put the perspective on the things that matter, which was not always their credit card, not always the consumer loans, but making their mortgage payments and hopefully their auto payments. And when that goes awry, you have a debtor who's a good person who just couldn't make it work. So we wanted to go in and we wanted to have the professional side with the banks, telling our story, who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And we wanted to make sure that they were assured that there were certain safeguards in place. So when they sold their debt, they weren't going to get in trouble down the field with, a company that's not professional, saying the wrong things, getting the banks in trouble. So that's kind of why we created Cherrywood, and that was the first step. So we had to establish a good name.
Yeah.
The second aspect was we had to work with the right attorneys who were going to work with us. And we vetted our attorneys. A lot of them we've worked with for over a decade. We know their processes. We know how they work. We know what they do, what they want, and what they don't, right? So that was the second installment. And then the third, we had to have kind of the marrying of both sides of it, saying this is how we want to effectively collect on these, and this is what we don't want. This is what we want to say, and this is what we don't want. It's not all about making as much money as we potentially could, although that is important. But it's also about working with the consumer and doing so with a compassionate heart, knowing that they've come across some financial woes, and we're there to help. Basically, we're not expecting $10,000 tomorrow, but we can do so in installment payments over the course of 3 to 5 years to make it a little bit easier for them, all maintaining that integrity of our company and the bank.
Yeah, I love it. It makes sense because you work with banks and credit unions, auto lenders, commercial lenders nationwide, and they lend out the money to good people. And these good people have every intention to pay it back. But like you mentioned, sometimes things go a little awry. Sometimes things go a little sideways, and then people don't know what bill to pay. And sometimes they get behind, and sometimes these debts get charged off. And like you mentioned, the thing that really caught our attention is the way in which you approach it. You have a good training with your attorneys. You let them understand exactly the approach that you want to be known for, because the banks are also looking to you to make sure that you handle these clients or these past clients with kid gloves in a very nice way so that you can put them on the road to what I call financial freedom. So, Craig, let's talk about that a little bit, about that whole mindset of you and the attorneys on the way in which you approach these people.
Yeah. So, the long and short of it is when we talk to the debtors, and in fact, when we interview and vet the attorneys too, again, we want to be on the same page with them. So we're approaching this as though it's not something intentional that was done to the bank. So when we're purchasing credit cards, auto deficiencies, and that's a big one, auto deficiencies for us, because the debtor has lost their vehicle. They lost the means of transportation to get to and from to work. So, and of course, the bigger thing is probably getting their kids to and from school. So that's one of the first things. And I personally love auto deficiencies because I think there's the process to be able to fix what went wrong and to get the person back on the right road, right? So what we do is when we reached out to the debtors, of course, the first thing we do is send out a 30-day letter, or the attorney does, I should say, to let them know that Cherrywood is now the owner of their debt portfolios, to kind of give them that pat on the back that says, listen, we know something has come about. We're not the bad guy here, but give us a call, or here's our phone number. Here's our email address. Let's talk. Let's get you fixed in this financial situation, and let's figure out how we can do so together. So that's the first process. Then after the 30-day process happens, most of the time you're not going to get a response from the debtor. So then they do a follow-up. And again, every attorney office handles the processes a little bit different. Some of them will continue to make phone calls, send a couple more letters, what we call the soft approach. So we want to make sure that we've established that trust or some type of relationship, letting the debtor know thoroughly we're now the owners. And then second, sending out the letters, letting them know how to get in touch with us, what happened, what the next processes are, and what they can be. And then, from there, usually after 45 days or so, then they're going to go ahead and serve the debtors to let them know, hey, we got to go to court. And this is where we are. So they've got a date and a time to be there. The judge orders everything. They sign off on the what we call the interview process with 3 parties. So we got the attorney, we've got the judge, and we've got the debtor. At that point, we establish that, again, we want to set up some sort of a payment plan or working out some sort of installment history with them. Once we've got that in place, everybody's on the good path, and it's just a matter of making payments on a monthly basis. Once they pay off the loan, then they get a letter that everything's been solved. We don't report on the credit bureaus. Again, we want to take that soft approach, but if it was by the issuer, we let the issuer know that the debtor has paid off their portion of the debt, and they can go ahead and remove that if they haven't already. In some cases, unfortunately, the debtor doesn't show up to court. We have to go in the way of a judgment. The judge will give it to us. And then there's a process by which we can garnish wages, we can garnish bank accounts. But again, that's a last resort. That's after we've thoroughly exhausted all of our abilities to try to get into contact with the debtor and get everything resolved.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. Of course, for the banks that do business with you, there are a number of benefits of selling off their charge-off loan portfolio. And I would imagine it has a lot to do with liquidity. So let's talk about some of the reasons why the banks will sell their charged off loan portfolio to your company that actually benefits the bank.
Yeah. So the first step and the easiest solution here is the fact that a lot of times it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how many times you send out a letter, it doesn't matter how many times you make a phone call with the debtor, they're just not going to pay, unfortunately. So with that, you're walking away from a loan. That's why they charge it off. They're getting it off their docs, and they're just saying, we're done. So at that point, they're not getting any money for their charged off loans, and these accumulate over the course of years. So once you have that portfolio that's probably millions of dollars and thousands of debtors, what do? You can either not sell it, maintain that, and just wash your hands of it. And hey, that's the cost of doing business, which a lot of banks do. And it's not necessarily the wrong way to look at it. However, especially if you're a publicly traded bank, or if you've got a board that you have to approach on certain decisions, this might not be the best approach. You might want to just not write everything off and try to get something for these accounts that otherwise you wouldn't. That's where we come. So we work with the banks. We look at everything going back 4 years, in some instances 5 and 6 years, depending upon the state and the statute of limitations. And then we're going to let them know, listen, we're going to try to be as aggressive as we can. But the good thing is you're going to get a dollar figure for every single one of those accounts. Rather than just walk away, why not get something back on these accounts that you normally would not? The banks sometimes will outsource these to collection agencies. And again, collection agencies are the heartbeat of the whole process in the industry. However, again, as I mentioned earlier, going with letters and phone calls, you may get some results, but you're certainly not going to get every single one of those debtors to respond. They know the game at this point. It's going to be phone calls. It's going to be letters. If you ignore it, yeah, you might take a hit on our credit, but that's the worst case scenario. If you're going through financial ruins at the moment, that's not on the forefront of your brain. So at that point, that's when I recommend to the banks, use the collection agencies, pull it back after X amount of times. And you can see, if you look at a certain month or time frame that you've got these accounts with an agency, there's going to be a drop off of payments. At that point, that's when you throw up the white flag, pull it back from the collection agency, and sell what's left. So that's what I always recommend. You're going to get money back on both sides. You're going to get what we call the low-hanging fruit, those that you make a phone call or two, send out a letter, they're going to respond, they're going to work out a payment plan, they're going to make a payment right up front. Maybe they fix whatever financial woes they were going through. But the majority of those cases have not. And that's when you want to get something for nothing. That's why we are created. That's where we benefit a bank or another financial lender. That's why we want to work with them out there, because we're giving them something for every single one of those accounts. And we try to be as aggressive on our pricing as we can.
Yeah, I love it. And I would imagine a bank or financial institution, they spend so much time, energy, and effort, Craig, building their brand up and building the name up. And I would imagine that if they do sell this bad debt to your company, in a way they can help protect their brand. Let's talk about that and how that possibly could be a reason why a bank reaches out to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you use collection agencies, and again, I'm not trying to put a negative light on the collection agencies, but there's a lot of people that will come in that they train to put on the phones, and everybody knows that there's certain things you can and cannot say, and there's a process with how you collect your debt portfolios. Could be a mistake. You could have a collector that says the wrong thing on the phone, or what I always say is you got an aggressive collector who's probably one of the top performers of the agency. They may say something on the phone that they know they shouldn't, but they're so close to getting their commissions, so they say that wrong thing, but maybe they put it in a way that it can be construed as towing the line. That's where you can get in trouble, especially with the CFPB. There's certain times that you can call debtors, there's certain things you can say on the phones, there's certain things that you can answer the phone and say and not say. And there's a lot of policies and procedures in place that protect the consumers, rightly so. However, when you work with an attorney and you work with a buyer such as myself, we alleviate that. There's not one attorney out there that's going to put his bar license on the line just to collect a few $1,000s. It just doesn't happen. And if it does, it's certainly not with the attorneys that we work with. Again, our vetting process is pretty solid. So in terms of working with us, we alleviate those concerns with what could go wrong, with how everything can go right. And that's one of the things that I'd say are the strengths of working with a company like myself and Cherrywood Enterprises.
Yeah, I love it. It seems to me like that is one of your USPs, unique selling propositions. And for the entrepreneurs watching the show, we talk about it all the time, but, Cherrywood Enterprises under, Craig's leadership, you have attorneys. And like you said, I mean, they're best in breed. They're people that really understand the ins and outs on how to approach people in not only the right way based on your dynamic at Cherrywood, Craig, but also a way that falls within the lines of what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. And I'm sure the banks feel real good about that. Are you currently bolstering your attorney team, or are you?
Well, I would never say that we know and have everything in place of our attorney groups that we work with. So we're always looking, we're always vetting, we're always growing. Attorneys are too. Sometimes they become so large that they can't take on everybody's cases, and that's completely understandable. So just like in football, you always got to have a backup that's ready to step up. And with that, again, comes a continued vetting process. So I like to call it a continuation of education. So you want to make sure that you're staying on top of the game. We belong to an association that they are very pro collection, pro debt buying, and they make sure that they're keeping up to date with everything that changes in every state and every law. That's important. And that's one of the things that we go to these conferences on an annual basis. We're constantly learning what's changed, what hasn't, what we can and cannot say and do. If you don't know that, and if you don't have your policies and procedures in place with you and your team, then you're setting yourself up for disaster, because eventually it's going to come down on you. So again, that's just one of the things why I like to work with an attorney, because again, they have the same type of associations that they belong to. They're getting updated on everything from licensing to and updated with the state laws, and you should. So I think that's one of the biggest selling points with us, is we're not just a boutique out there that buys and sells debt portfolios or buys debt and places it with an attorney, and we don't care what's done thereafter, because we do. We keep in touch with our attorneys on a monthly basis. We get monthly reports with what's done, what has been, where we are on the law process, and where they are in the judicial process. And I think that's important in conversations, because again, fortunately, one of the prevalent things in our industry is people are declaring bankruptcy all the time. One of the things you have to know is if somebody declares bankruptcy, at that point, there's a no-touch rule. You can't call, you can't continue to do any collections. If it's discharged, you're done. That account is no longer anything that you can do as far as the collections are concerned. But if they are dismissed and not discharged, then everything is starting up all over again, and you can get after that. So that's one of the things you want to make sure that you've got an attorney group that stays on top of these cases. And if somebody does declare bankruptcy, they know, can't touch them, can't call them, but they stay on top of the updates with the debtors. And if they is dismissed, boom, here we go. Let's get started up again. Let's see what we can do, and let's work with these debtors.
Wow. It's a fascinating business. When we think about the financial institutions, Craig, and we think about them selling their charged off debt portfolio, how simple do you make it for them? Is it, how fast can you look at the portfolio? How does it get uploaded into a system, whether it's a PDF file or an Excel spreadsheet? And then how fast do you get back to the banks with sort of the offer to buy the portfolio?
Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So I think in this process, I'm going to give over to our underwriting team, who is amazing. Again, you talk about a team that is professional. So the first thing we do in the process is we're going to send out a mutual non-disclosure agreement, and that just protects everybody's proprietary information. Along with that, we're going to send over an Excel spreadsheet that's blank outside of the headers of information that we need. We ask the banks, credit unions, auto lenders, that they can fill in all the information, and they can do it in one of two ways. Either one, copy and paste all the information, simplistic enough. But when you work with a bank, especially some of the larger banks, they don't have time to go through and line by line click everything in. So with that, we say, listen, if you've got in your system the ability to pull out an Excel spreadsheet with the information we're looking for, maybe it's in a different order, go with that. Let's work with that. that listing, we'll make the changes to what we need to in our underwriting process. And we also ask for the backup docs because we want to make sure going into it that we know everything that could be a potential roadblock for us, whether it be arbitration language, language that applies to attorney fees and court costs. We want to have everything in place. So that process, once we get the Excel spreadsheet and the documentation, we underwrite within 3 to 5 business days, which means we come back with an offer. We will tell you this is where we are, and we give you the reasons why. It's primarily geographic. It's going to be, again, touching on that language. It could be the last payment days, which is the statute of limitations we have to be able to collect on these successfully. We're going to come back and let everybody know why, but I will assure every single bank and other financial lender that we work with that we are going to be as aggressive as we can because we know every dollar counts on both sides of the transaction. That being said, once they get our offer and it's accepted, which we hope that more often than not it is, then we put together a purchase and sale agreement inclusive of a bill of sale that transfers all rights and responsibilities to the bank, Cherrywood. And of course, once we get everything signed, we fund immediately, typically within 24 hours of getting that signed agreement. And then at that point, we need all the backup docs and we go to work. It's that simple, and no more than 14 days, if everybody's on their A game, is how long the process should take.
Wow, that's fast. You mentioned your great underwriting department. I know you love what they do, and they've been trained to the highest level. When we think about sort of the number of loans in a tranche or the number of loans that come across, is there an average number of loans that you're looking at one time when a financial institution sends over the Excel spreadsheet? Like, can it be 5 loans? Can it be 5,000 loans? What is there an average number of loans, or does it just depend on the institution and the type of loan involved?
So since we've started this, we kind of learned what works and what doesn't. So we tell, and again, that's advantageous for both sides again. We tell everybody we work with, we want to see at least minimum of 10 loans with at least 100,000 or close to in face value. When it comes to maximums, the bigger the better. And I know they always say it's not always the size, but what you can do with it. But in terms of these loans, I want to get as much as we possibly can. Because again, the law of collections, it's all about the numbers game. So the more accounts you have, the more potential you have to be successful in return on your investment. 10, I think, is that number that it gives us. If we collect 1 or 2, even 3, which is the average, then we can make a small profit. Of course, we prefer as many cases as possible and as millions and millions and millions of dollars as we can get. And all of that applies to it. So the bigger the portfolio, the faster we can fund to you. The 3 to 5 business days is in effect, and it's very simplistic.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the documentation. I know I'm going a little geeky here into it, but it's very fascinating. So when I go, or someone goes into a bank or financial institution, or we buy a car and we do auto financing, we sign a lot of documents. And do all the documents come over to you and then end up with the attorneys, or what portion of those documents actually end up over to you for the process?
Yeah, so good point. Audit deficiencies is usually the most documented portfolios that we purchase. With that, and again, there's various in different states, but for the most part, we're looking for the signed contracts. We're looking for the when they're going to repossess the vehicles, there's documentation that needs to go out. There's the deficiency letter that needs to go out, and then there's payment histories. Everything else on consumer loans and credit cards is primarily just going to be the application of statements went home and the payment histories. That's what the courts are requiring nowadays. The more we have, the better we can present our case. So more is always better, but at a bare minimum, those are the basics.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, you have an amazing team. I mean, when we look at the people working at Cherrywood with you, it looks like a who's who of, this type of a space, this type of an approach, this type of what I call a human sort of approach to collecting on this bad debt. How important to Cherrywood is the team? You mentioned the underwriters. I know you have an executive leadership team. Talk about your team and the process of making sure that you have the right team members in the right place to effectuate all these things that you're doing. Yeah,
so the old adage is you can never have too many chiefs in in your workspace. So I like when we're interviewing, I want to see that spark. I want to see that leadership capability. And whether it's somebody that we're hiring just to do, the basics, getting in their marketing prospects, getting in different banks and credit unions that we work with, all the way down to our underwriting team. It's somebody that's going to be able to step up. Integrity is a big thing with us. In fact, we've got, pillars that we use, and I put this in every single one of our candidates, that if you have these types of pillars, we're all going to be success together. And the more success we have, the greater things become. So I've purposely haven't built Cherrywood to be this big conglomerate company, and I don't have plans of going public with that at all. But what I do want is a family feel with everybody that's pulling their weight, that has the leadership capabilities and also the integrity type of characteristics that we want. And I think it applies to, everybody on the team, that we have not had any CFPB lawsuits or complaints against us, knock on wood, since our inception. It's just not something we have, we don't want, and we do and take the steps to make sure that it doesn't happen. Again, that plays to the security and the safety of working with Cherrywood Enterprises.
Yeah, I love it. You mentioned the 6 pillars of character: trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. And you do such a great job. And when I think about it and I look at what you're doing, something that's very apparent during the interview is you have some sports paraphernalia behind you. And of course, I'm looking at one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, of course, Eli, one of your favorites. Let's talk about that a little bit, because when you're in business, it gets competitive. And, you have one of the greatest competitors over your shoulder of all time. When we look at entrepreneurship, Craig, how important is the competitive spirit to not only, respect and be responsible and be fair and caring and provide this great citizenship and trustworthiness, but at the same time, at least for the younger entrepreneurs, speaking to them, you have to compete every day. So maybe you could talk about that as well.
Well, growing up, sports is a big thing, and you always wanted to compete. And those greater matches, or those greater athletes that you competed against, they made you better. And everybody says it all the time. Peyton Manning was a big influence on me growing up, as far as what he always said. Hulk Hogan was another one. I know it's kind of silly, but say your prayers, eat your vitamins. It's a matter of not only being competitive and wanting to be the top out there and doing what you can to be better than your competition. You have to stay on top of that mountain. So you're always going to have somebody that's going to come in. There may be a new company, there may be a new owner, there may be a new president that's going to come out, and they're going to offer everything under the sun. They're going to look all shiny and new and fresh, and that's great. And I love competition. But I think, especially in my industry, it's about longevity. And if you can stay into this industry for as long as we have, now we're over a decade old, and I've been in the industry since 2009. If you're doing what you say you're going to do and you follow through with your promises, then that's got to be something that has got to be said out there against your competition, that you're doing it right. My father was also a big influence, and he told me, remember, the one thing that about your name is that's attached to me too. So you always want to maintain that good last name. Doesn't matter what you do. If you're a garbage man, if you're a physician to a dentist, whatever you do it with integrity. And that's one of the things that I brought to the table that I want to do. I want to respect my parents and my grandparents and everybody that came before me. And I think Cherrywood kind of encompasses all that in we want to do and treat everybody with respect, whether it's a debtor who maybe not the nicest person on the phone, but there's a reason for that, I truly believe. Or it's the companies that we work with, the attorneys that we work with, the banks and credit unions. One of the things I always try to come across is, listen, you're working with a company that's loyal, that's honest, that's hardworking, that has the characteristics that I would think you would want to work with us on a continuous basis, not just once, but we want to work with you on years to come, whether it's once a year, whether it's twice a year, quarterly, whatever the case is. We've got those relationships we've worked with for people. And I think it always comes through with your integrity. If that's what you're going to match that with your responses, and of course the dollars and cents that come with it, then you're doing it right.
Wow. Love what your dad told you. For the entrepreneurs watching the show, rewind what Craig just said. I mean, Craig's dad told him, listen, you've got my same last name as my dad. So let's make sure we keep that name bright and and in line with, bringing brightness and lightness to the world, and let's not mess it up. I love it. Now, before I let you go, I want to talk to the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, because maybe they're having a tough time. Maybe they're hitting a wall. Maybe they're hitting a roadblock. We've all had it as entrepreneurs. Maybe you can share, Craig, some thoughts with them about what it takes to keep on pushing as an entrepreneur and, break that wall down and get on the other side and keep on going.
Well, I can tell you this. When I first started Cherrywood, it was the first 2 years. And I tell this to everybody that starts a business, the first 2 years are the toughest. But if you can survive those first 2 years, boy, I'll tell you, year 3, year 4, year 5, you're really going to relish in the successes. So what that has to do with is consistency. And that's the biggest thing if you want to make it out there. When you start from day one and you're all excited, you got your new computer, you got your new pads and your new pens, and you start going to the conferences and you start making the names and shaking the hands and kissing the babies. That's great. That's all well and good. And that's all necessary to lay the groundwork for what you want to do. But it all comes down to the grunt work at the back when nobody sees what you're doing. Making the phone calls, follow through, saying whatever you say you're going to do, you got to follow through with it. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't leave my office that I haven't returned every single phone call and that I haven't returned every single email. And even above and beyond, when I do get home, 6:30 at night, and there's some people on the West Coast that are still emailing and calling, I still take those calls. Now, understood, I've got my family and my wife. So when we sit down for dinner, the phones are off, the TV's off, and it's all about my time with her. But during business hours and sometimes thereafter, you have to make yourself available, especially if it's going to be something that is crucial to your business, to being a success. You have to follow through. And that's, I think, the biggest thing you can do out there is whatever you say you're going to do it. If you can't do it, don't think you can follow through. Don't make that promise, because people are going to hold you to that promise. And you gosh darn better be able to follow through with that. And I think that's the biggest thing. But again, once you get past year 2, and if you're maintaining that consistency and professionalism, there's no reason why you can't make a success out of yourself and your company, especially if you've got the right team in place like I do, fortunately.
Wow, I love it. And of course, you're probably have already had that conversation, or will have the conversation that your dad had with you, and your dad's dad probably had with him, with your kids as well. So you're going to keep it rolling along. And I just love it so much. I want to take a minute. I know you're super busy, to thank you for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today to talk about Cherrywood. I mean, you really have been at it for a long time. Very solid. The team you've put together are the best in the business. The lawyers that you have on your team are remarkable. And the financial institutions that you work with really love doing business with you. And it's just great to have such a successful entrepreneur on the show today. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, and I appreciate you having me.